Ooh, recording in progress. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you for having me. Again, my name is Cynthia Riddell. I'm a board certified real estate attorney here in Sarasota and Manatee counties, Riddell Law Group. We've been in practice for many years. I started practicing with my dad, who is now officially retired. And so it's me running the office. So here we go. One of the things when I was a young attorney, I came out right around 2008. So it was quite an interesting experience cutting my teeth on primarily short sales, foreclosures, and bankruptcy work. Luckily, we've all kind of come out of that. It's been, a long time, I think, since a lot of us have even thought about short sales or dealt with people possibly in pre-foreclosure. So I think with some of the trends that we're seeing, this is timely, though, to kind of go back, take a little bit of a refresher, look at some of these things that we didn't really want to, look at again, ever again, but, to obviously be able to service the customers, service the sellers, deal with people in distress. It's a good bit of refresher and education. So hopefully you take something out of this that you didn't know before. All right. So we're going to start with distressed deals done right, your guide to short sales and foreclosures. Let's see if this works. There we go. Maybe not. Okay, so we're not going to get started with the. You can take notes. No, nope, it's not working. But I will go ahead and make sure that Denise has the PowerPoint to circulate afterwards for sure. Yeah. There we go. All right. So oh, you did that? Okay, let me try this. No. Does the keyboard work? I'll use the keyboard. Okay. All right.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah, just forward and back.
Yep.
Okay, so obviously we've got some learning objectives, seminar overview. So we're going to talk about skills. We're going to go through the short sale approval contingency rider. We're going to go through some of sort of the market trends just to give, and then the process questions. And most of what I'm focusing on is the short sale side of it. I will address foreclosures towards the end, but obviously most of you are here to hear mostly about the short sale information. Learning objectives are there, dealing with the process, navigating the opportunity, foreclosure opportunities, communicating with lenders, negotiating liens, and avoiding these common pitfalls. So if you haven't done this before, well, actually, show of hands, how many people in this room have had to actually work on a short sale? Okay. Okay. All right. So we've got a few. And obviously you all were with me during the great financial crisis. So we've been there. A few things have changed and there are a few things to think about, but generally the process is the same. So we'll go through some of those updates. So market overview trends. The reason why I felt this was timely, we're looking at, inventory rise here in the state. You've got this expanding development that's happened. A lot of people moved here, obviously during COVID, just, a lot of just explosion of population. We've got an increase too in the cost of ownership. A lot of people are looking at the insurance costs, the property tax costs, including obviously the interest rates, things like that. So, it's hard, where are these buyers buying sort of mid-range homes? Where are you listing at? People are sitting longer days on market. So you've got more and more supply and less of this buyer population that can actually afford to buy these homes at current rates, things like that with the current insurance and the current property tax paradigm. Whether that will change, who knows? Obviously, I think a lot of you guys are familiar with some of this action towards eliminating property taxes on homesteads. Obviously, too, insurance, they're trying to get different carriers to come back in, depopulate citizens, trying to maneuver some of that to reduce some of the costs. Obviously, though, that's slow coming and we don't know what the result is going to be. We're dealing with reality here and now. It's just very expensive right now for these folks to purchase these homes between the interest rates, insurance, and the property taxes. So again, we're dealing with a smaller buyer pool, more and more listings depresses obviously prices. The silver tsunami theory. There's a lot of doom and gloom talk, and I'm going to try to make this less doom and gloom. But certainly there's a theory and an idea. A majority of investment property, rental property here is actually, you've got like mom and pops owning a couple rental properties, or they kept their first home, then traded up, they kept that one as a rental. You've got a lot of folks, maybe in their 60s with a portfolio of properties, that they've rented. They're getting up in age. Maybe they don't want to deal with as much of the management costs and the headaches, plus all of these additional carrying costs are getting more and more expensive. So the idea is that, thank you, that all of this additional inventory is going to just surge in, here in the next decade. And so there's concern that that will also as well deflate prices because there'll be just so much more inventory. Whether it's true or not, I'm not an economist, I'm not a theorist, I don't have a PhD in that, but it is something out there. NAR has an article on it. It's something, obviously people need to be thinking about. Municipal and county services, obviously with the property taxes, if those are eliminated, we need to find another source of funds, obviously to pay our firemen, policemen, all the things, all the county services that are provided. I don't know what that looks like. If you reduce the tax base, what happens to jobs? I'm not here, I don't want to be political. I'm like Sweden here. I'm neutral, but these are things to be thinking about, just demographics in the area that can affect the property prices and potentially further push prices down. So a couple articles, you have, younger folks, maybe, late 30s, mid 40s, concerned about the increased cost of, carrying these properties. They buy properties and all of a sudden the assessments go up drastically, maybe in the condo world, because the insurance obviously costs have gone up. And they're just looking at, oh gosh, how am I going to be able to keep paying for this? Or I can I even sell it for what I bought it for? So there's a lot of that anxiety going on. And then this addresses that silver tsunami in real estate, with people looking, to really enjoy the twilight of their years. They're not going to be wanting to, deal with management of property, maybe liquidate. That was a NAR article. It was a good read, informative. So, I would suggest maybe somebody take a look at that. So I subscribe to the ReVenture app, which aggregates statistics. And I pulled these two graphs. One for, this is Sarasota County, and it's showing the peak from 2022, which is typically, anecdotally, where everybody sort of, that's the peak right before the interest rate hikes, sort of the hangover of the COVID 2021 crazy marathon that we all ran, where everybody was moving here. They didn't care what they paid for the property. They just wanted to get the heck out of wherever they were coming from. So this has been the trend. And I think we all have experienced this over the last couple of years, that the trend is downward. So the question then is presented, this is Manatee County, what do we do with all of those folks that came in 2021, okay, that, you had 15, 20 offers day two on some property somebody was selling, gap addendums, to cover the appraisal issues, people bringing cash to closing, not caring that they're essentially purchasing a property that's $20,000 or $50,000 underwater day one. They did that in 2021. Where are they now? So those are sort of, that's the market that I think, is going to be there for the short sale sort of negotiation out there. Is somebody that thought that they would be able to remote work. They bought the property in 2021. They basically made the gap up of $20,000, $50,000, who knows what. And now they're looking to sell because they got to get back to the office, or maybe they just didn't like it here, or things change, life changes. And now they got to sell, and you're sitting there at a listing appointment with them showing comps and saying, no, it's just, you're not going to sell it for what you bought it for. So then the next conversation is what happens when you are short? Whether or not somebody wants to dip into a protected retirement account to make up a mortgage, I don't know if that's going to be feasible for people. Obviously, stock market's high. People might have other assets they can pull from to make the lender whole, but I think the majority of folks, that's not the case. So the short sale process basics. So what happens first? Well, typically what happens is when you're dealing with a short sale, you're typically dealing with somebody who essentially has already been in default or is very close to default. And what has happened now with servicers is essentially your mortgage is due on the 1st. You got that 15-day grace period. The servicers now, day 16, 17, they are calling the homeowners. What's up? What's the problem? So it is a little bit more proactive from that I've been hearing anecdotally, is that the servicers are essentially, reaching out as soon as possible. Technically you don't have the credit hit till they're 30 days late. That line item goes on their credit. At that point, if somebody's willing to start taking the credit hits, that things are not good. That this is probably something that's, needs to be resolved either through loss mitigation like a short sale, or ultimately they're going to end up in foreclosure. So the other thing too is applying for a short sale, you have to demonstrate hardship. All right. So you've got to demonstrate hardship. One of those things that demonstrates hardship is not making the installment payment, right? Trying to sort of pre-apply for a short sale prior to default, where the homeowner is just, scrimping and saving and not eating or whatever, not paying credit cards to try to still make the mortgage payment, but also deal with the servicer and try to start the short sale process. I have not seen that be successful. They've got piles and piles of other people that are 60-day, 90-day, 120 days behind, that they're going to process those first. Typically, you don't want to be in a position where you're telling somebody to not pay their mortgage. That's, there are legal consequences for that. That's what lawyers are for. But I can tell you that, if somebody is not in default, it's hard to get the short sale process started and moving forward. But again, I wouldn't as a realtor be telling somebody, oh, no problem, just don't pay your mortgage. That's not for you guys to give. That's certainly the beginning of the encouragement. Talk to an attorney, also talk to a CPA. There are legal consequences, obviously, for you not paying this mortgage. But, we've got some professionals, we can suggest, have them get some counseling in that regard. So, the short sale just in general is an instance where you can't sell the property for as much as you owe on the mortgage. It's pretty straightforward, right? That's why it's short. And so you have to make this application to ask the lender to essentially release their lien for less than the full payoff. That's the ultimate goal, because you have to have the lender agree to release the lien so you can convey title to the end buyer. So that is what you're requesting. Second, basically there's a short sale application. A borrower can, like I said, is typically contacted by the servicer. The moment the servicer is not getting, that payment, they're going to be reaching out to the borrower, trying to find out what the situation is, what type of, is this a forbearance type of thing? Is this a modification thing? Is this a jingle mail thing, as they say, if you guys have heard that phrase? Yeah, mail in the keys to the lender. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the question for the recording is basically, what does the conversation look like from a realtor who's not giving legal advice? What do you do when you're faced with a seller that's just like, I don't have the money. What do I do? What's the timeline? What my belief is, you want to get them speaking to an attorney, number one, speaking to a CPA, or even if I were to speak to somebody, I would tell them also you need to talk to a CPA because there's also potentially tax consequences with this type of transaction. I would explain the transaction and explain to them that ultimately, the moment you are basically 120 days past due, there are some legal processes that are going to begin. Your realtor can't tell you what to do or what not to do and not essentially face some sort of issue here. You need to understand there's going to be consequences to your credit. There's consequences for doing this. But the bottom line is, as a realtor, you counseling people is kind of, again, you guys are like psychologists, I mean, you're always working with people. The sooner somebody deals with an issue, the better. I feel like if you're early in the timeline, meaning they are meeting with you, sitting down with you at the listing appointment, they're essentially like, I don't have money for this next payment. What do I do? You get them to an attorney, you get them to a CPA to talk to somebody about what the consequences are, how they want to proceed. They need to feel comfortable with you, and understand the short sale process too from your perspective. But we would also explain to them sort of the legal process during the short sale. So my first piece of advice is get them to the professionals so we can take on that issue with them. But I think too, you've got to potentially get people to act sooner than later. The longer they wait, they're going to reach a point in time where they really, I mean, they can't, it's like nobody can eat tuna fish and eggs, for months and months. You got to start trying to solve your problems. This is a potential solve. It's not a perfect situation. It's far from it. And there are going to be some imperfect consequences, like a credit hit, like the fact that you probably can't get another mortgage for 7 years. Okay. But these are the things that, this is a solution here to the hurt. The deficiency. Okay, we'll get to that. I mean, bottom line is that's part of negotiating. Ultimately, there's a certain process of obtaining a deficiency. Obviously, the goal of every short sale application is to get the short sale contract approved at the current price the buyer has offered, get all the costs approved by the lender, get a release of lien, and have a complete deficiency waived. The shortfall, the difference, the delta between what the lender is getting and what they're actually owed. Whether or not that'll happen, you don't really know until you're in the process. And you don't really know until you know what type of loan it is, whether there's mortgage insurance, things like that. So what do you mean what the goal is? Oh, yeah, I mean, the goal is to get the contract that's currently presented to the seller approved by the lender to release, obviously, the mortgage lien for less than what's owed on the property. and to waive any balance owed, which we refer to as the deficiency. We also want to get the costs that we're submitting to the lender on the draft closing statement approved, which includes commissions, closing costs, all those things. You're welcome. You're welcome. Go ahead. Yeah, potentially. You know, there were some programs that allowed for people to get certain FHA financing sooner than 7 years after one of these type of short sales or even bankruptcy type of situations, depending on the loan that they got out of. So there were some shorter periods, but for most people, it's a 7-year period potentially. Yeah, yeah. So they need to know, but these are, again, you guys are not on the ground explaining this stuff to them. When I would typically consult with someone on a short sale, and we do, you know, initial consultations, basically free for like 30 minutes. And, you know, you have to really kind of go through what their situation is. One of the handouts, though, that I have for you is essentially like my intake. I kind of tried to fix it more for, you know, something like a listing appointment, because you also need some of that information, because you're looking at trying to price it, you know, based on comps. Obviously, it's a distressed sale, but then we also have to know, like, what are we paying off? You know, it's not your typical net sheet. And, you know, my concern is always too, like, is the seller being that forthright with you? So, you know, but anyways, you've got to first, the borrower has to essentially correspond with their servicer, or you tell, you know, you would tell them, or I would tell them, we need to reach out to your servicer for your loan if they haven't already reached out, to get what's called a short sale package. Okay. And there's Fannie Mae Freddie Mac form 710, and it's essentially almost like a loan application that the seller borrower has to fill out. And that's going to include income, copies of W-2s if they have them, information about retirement accounts, information about all their stuff. So they're essentially getting completely underwritten again for this process. Question? Mm-hmm. Does it fall? They foreclose ahead of them. So, say, yeah. Mm-hmm. And also, it doesn't happen that much, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. You're skipping. It's like you've read my PowerPoint. No, you know, these are all great questions. I just tried, you know, to. Yeah, he does have superpowers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just the question for the recording was talking about subordinate liens. You know, you might be in a situation presented where they're, you know, 12 months behind in association assessments, you know, what then? And then a request to essentially go over forbearance. So getting back to this short sale application basics, one of the things the servicer will reach out for is just generally loss mitigation. So your general loss mitigation umbrella is some sort of forbearance, i.e. agreement to hold off on payments, or we'll tack it onto the back end of the loan, restart you at a certain, you know, lower amortized amount, because the $35,000 you're in arrears is now on the back end of your loan. We'll recast it, more affordable. Let's move forward with that type of thing, you know, like a modification. You have deed in lieu of foreclosure, which we didn't see too often. Deed in lieu of foreclosure is a difficult remedy for a mortgage holder to swallow, because there's typically subordinate liens that have to be foreclosed out. A deed in lieu of foreclosure is essentially the borrower handing the deed back to the lender, okay, almost like jingle mail except paper mail, but it has to be approved. You know, that the owner of the home can't just sign a quitclaim deed back to, you know, Penny Mac Loan Services. That's not how it works. A deed has to be accepted in order to be valid. So there's a whole process for that as well. But again, there has to be title run. The lender has to be comfortable. There's no subordinate liens, because why, if there is a subordinate lien that has to be foreclosed, why would you take a deed if you still have to do this other process? So that's the lender's position on that. So out of, you know, doing this type of distress work for like a decade, I mean, we did maybe 3 deeds in lieu. One of them was for a reverse mortgage property where somebody passed away and the heirs wanted to just be done with it. And that process alone took 7 months to approve. So deed in lieu, you don't see a lot of. There is the short sale option, obviously, which is, you know, what we're discussing today, where they sell it to a third party for less than what's owed. And then there is another process that's essentially like, you know, kind of give up, understand that it's going to be foreclosed, maybe get some money to move out somewhere. And it's like the deed in lieu, you know, process, but essentially like consenting to foreclosure. It's kind of similar. Sometimes there are incentives too to move out. Similar deed in lieu, sometimes they did cash for keys, and even in the short sale, sometimes there's relocation money available depending on the mortgage product. So there are some things to be thinking about. But bottom line is, when you're sitting there with a seller, I think you have to drill down, and that's why I like this checklist, you know, to kind of ask them about their information. And this is the other thing. These people have to be willing to be vulnerable with you, tell you about their financial troubles, tell you everything that's going on, because if they're not honest about what the picture is, nobody can really, you know, estimate what's the draft closing statement going to look like. If you don't tell me ahead of time that you think you're 12 months behind on HOAs, and then I find out when we get like a short sale close to approval, and it's like, oh, we get the estoppel, and it's, you know, a lawyer's letter that says it's $12,000. That's going to be a problem. So the sooner you know that ahead of time, the better. Question. No, that's a credit card debt's not going to be involved. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would be if somebody had a credit card judgment, meaning they didn't pay their credit card, and that judgment was recorded in official records, which becomes a lien on non-homestead property, i.e. investor property. Then you may have a judgment payoff you're also negotiating. But my whole point in trying to, you know, start this conversation and start with the realtor community now is that hopefully we don't go through what we did before, which is people sticking their head in the sand for 2+ years thinking it's all going to come back, everything will be fine. Being proactive is what, like, the key takeaway I want you guys to leave here with, and be able to convey that to people in a difficult situation, because you get the calls first before I do. Okay, they call you first. I need to sell this. I'm in a bad place. I'm in a bad way. I can't pay it anymore. You get the calls first. The sooner they act upon this, I would, you know, with HOA and condo dues, if you're going to scrimp and save to pay anything, you pay those. You know, and if the mortgage goes, the mortgage goes. The homeowners association dues and the condo dues are really tough to deal with. And yes, you are putting yourself in a situation where potentially they could foreclose in county court quickly, potentially, depending on how much is owed. There's jurisdictional limits for county and circuit court. What they did during the great financial crisis is they would take a small, you know, arrearage, foreclose in county court, take it subject to the first mortgage that was also in default. But we all heard the stories. It took those guys like 5 years to foreclose, right? So the association forecloses in county court, which is a little bit faster, takes title. Okay, now the homeowner no longer owns it. You're out. They would rent it while the first mortgage was foreclosing. But if they got 2-3 years of, average rent or even lower rent, than market rate, they probably recouped what they owed, or they're actually able to pay the ongoing maintenance expenses for that particular unit. Now, a couple of them would do that. And what would end up happening is at the county foreclosure, an investor would buy it. They would buy a property on a county, county foreclosure by an association for like $12,000, thinking they just got a property that was worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars for like $12,000. Well, sorry, sir, you didn't do your title search. There is a first mortgage in first position that's going to foreclose you out, okay, because foreclosure happens downstream. That big 800-pound gorilla is going to wake up one day and they're going to want their collateral back. So, but what I did see is investors, they would pay $12,000 for these condo association or homeowner association type of foreclosures, stick somebody in the property, pay the maintenance dues, then the condo and the HOA was happy they were getting paid, and then make whatever delta in between the rental amount and the condo dues, and they were happy. Most of the time, they got a pretty good return on their investment because it took those first position mortgage holders literally in some cases 5, 6, 7 years to foreclose. Yeah. So that was an investment scheme. Again, difference nowadays, when these foreclosures start happening, and they are on the uptick, Denise sent you the article, U.S. foreclosure activity climbs to highest level since 2020. The rules are different this time around. They are going to expedite, meaning the court. There are new civil rules that apply to civil cases, which a foreclosure lawsuit is. And those things, they are going to move these cases more quickly. So I don't think you're going to have a lot of the issues that we had years ago. There's been a lot of case law too regarding some of the defenses that were around that people would use. The lenders have gotten a little bit smarter about their documents. Not completely perfect, by the way, but they've gotten better. So the idea that foreclosure, you could stay there for 3, 4, or 5 years, I would not count on that. Jana. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So that gets us to our third, listing a short sale. When you are listing a short sale, you absolutely, you are the advocate for value. What happens when, they've decided to go through the short sale process, your homeowner, seller, borrower. They've gotten the short sale package together. They've gotten their financials together, proof of income, proof of assets, all the things, income versus monthly expenses. You listed it for sale. You've got some sort of offer and you feel comfortable because you've done your homework. They will order what's called a broker price opinion, not a full-blown appraisal. It's essentially some other broker looking at comp, looking at things, giving an opinion of value. Never, not necessarily, some of them weren't diligent enough to really spend a lot of time. So oftentimes that's exactly what happens. You get a value back that's, they say, well, increase your contract price because we got a BPO, you're at 350, our BPO is, 395. You then have to explain to them, well, your broker probably looked at some other house down the street that had the full kitchen redone. Ours hasn't. We've got distressed property. These folks haven't been maintaining it. And then you have to gather essentially your own, do another CMA, apparently, and then submit to them maybe bids for the things that need to be fixed. That most homeowners that are in financial stress are not maintaining the property. No. Yep. Yep. So just for the recording, we're talking about, basically explaining, we've got certain costs, certain things we can get, approved as far as short sale process. And the idea that when, you're submitting these offers to the lender, they're sending out a broker to give them a price opinion. Oftentimes they're going to come up, they're going to say, oh, that offer's too low. It needs to be X amount. And then you're going to have to be that advocate. You're going to have to make sure that you have these estimates for repairs and replacement. And the thing is, though, if they might come down, I mean, I've successfully negotiated a lot, with working with my realtor partners, like, hey, get me this information, I'll submit it all. We were able to, I mean, there was one that was so crazy off, like, and the inside of the house, like, was missing toilets and stuff. It was awful. So we were successful in getting the lender to actually agree that our price was great, and that yes, all these improvements and things need to be repaired or replaced. But the other side of that is on the buyer's perspective. Like, the buyer is submitting this offer. They need to be prepared, obviously, to be patient, but to also understand that, it really is as is, where is. There's no separate negotiation. There's no money left. So absolutely. I mean, that was smart. You've got to, like, prepare people for that, if they're looking to place an offer on a short sale. So just again, listing the short sale, the other thing that you're going to need is what's called a third-party authorization. Okay. All these lenders, I can say I'm somebody's attorney till I'm blue in the face. The lender doesn't care. If I don't have my third-party authorization signed by my seller homeowner, I'm not going to be able to talk to their servicer. Same for you guys. I always like to have a third-party authorization signed off by the homeowner that allows me to talk to their servicer and the realtor to talk to the servicer, because we may need to do different things at different times. Or we want to make sure they have your contact for when that BPO is happening. Maybe, be there to make sure that they don't just hire somebody from, like, Timbuktu that doesn't understand the area. So it's important to have that. The listing questionnaire, net sheet discussion, and disclosure on MLS. This is important. So obviously you guys have to note that it is a distress sale, short sale, pre-foreclosure. We've got to make sure that the buyer pool out there is aware of what's going on. The other thing you should be aware of is that certain lenders, like Fannie Mae, has like a 5-day rule where you can't accept offers on day one when it goes live. Some of the other ones have a 10-day rule. So, making sure that, we don't, depending on the type of loan, that we're not already starting off on a bad foot. Like, oh, we got like 3 different offers on day 2. The lender's not really going to entertain offers until a certain period of time has passed. Again, thinking that from the lender's perspective, they want to make sure everybody gets a bite at the apple because they want the highest and best. So, they don't want, offers day 1 and take it off the market and think like, oh, we missed an opportunity here for more money. So that's something to think about too when you're listing on MLS and disclosing, and you've got these offers coming in. Comparables, value justification, we talked about that with the estimates for repair and replacement. If you can get your homeowner, to obviously do that. Like, what have you guys not done? What have you guys been putting off? If you had all the money all of a sudden tomorrow to take care of this house, what are the things that we need to be thinking about that need repair or replacement? Last thing on this slide, no UPL, meaning do not practice law, right? This is my encourage the homeowner, borrower, seller to consult with an attorney and consult with a CPA. Going back to the question of the deficiency or the delta between what the lender may receive in the short sale versus what's owed. Okay, that amount is typically considered phantom income, okay, according to the IRS, meaning you had a loan obligation to repay it when I gave you the loan, when the mortgage holder gave the borrower a loan. So that's not considered income because you had to repay it. But the moment the lender says, no thanks, you don't have to pay it anymore, boop, IRS says that's income. So there is anything more than $600, they get a 1099-C for. Now, I'm not a tax CPA, tax preparer. I know enough to be dangerous. This is not tax advice for the recording. But you know what there are oftentimes, there are certain exclusions potentially to being able to exclude that, but there are strict, rules as to whether or not you may be able to exclude that from your income and having to pay tax on it. And that's again why the CPA is essential, because for instance, for investment property back in the day, I filed at least 5 cases that I can remember, bankruptcy cases, where we had to file the bankruptcy and discharge the mortgage debt that way, because the tax implications for this homeowner when they waived the deficiency were just going to be like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that's one of the exemptions, is a bankruptcy filing. Go ahead.
On the buyer side,
Mm-hmm.
like I have a lot of clients that are young, and they, like your first slide saying they can't afford the market right now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking for VA loans that are 3%, or they're scouring for short sales. They keep throwing short sales at me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know enough about short sales, but they think they can still negotiate $25,000, $50,000 short sale. I'm like, I doubt it. If they're underwater anyway. What do you see with that aspect of it?
Oh, that reminds me of one that I did. It was a short sale with 3 liens we had to negotiate on the seller's side, and the buyers were doing VA financing. And when you're doing VA financing, you guys are all familiar with the fact that like there's certain appraisal requirements, FHA too, but VA is like real tough, right? And so things have to be fixed. So that was a difficult situation. That's why, I mean, anytime you're doing a VA or FHA loan for the buyer acquiring a short sale, it can get really, really tricky, because you may, yeah.
If they're just searching for short sale because they think, I'm going to get a great deal,
Oh, they're discounting the discount?
They think
yeah. Okay, so the question for the recording is, let's look for short sales because we can just lowball those folks even more because they're distressed. Not the case. The homeowner, of course, who's getting 0 funds at the end of the day and just needs to get out of this mess, probably wouldn't care if you lowballed them another 25,000. The lender does. The lender is going to perform this broker price opinion, this BPO, which is their mini little appraisal, not a full-blown appraisal. And they're going to be looking at the same comps you looked at to justify your listing amount, right? And then you're going to have to do the math to reduce it, to say, well, but this is distressed. It's not like the comparable down the street where those folks, beautiful lawn, they maintain, da, 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 da. So that's why we discounted it by X dollars. And so if you're getting presented an offer by somebody who's then further lowballing it, you just have to be either countering and be realistic about, look, I don't want to, this is a process. This is eating up time for my seller, valuable time. So we're not going to mess around with further discount offers that comparables, even when you discount the distressed out of it, it's just there's still a difference there, because the lender is likely not to approve it. The lenders are not going to let these things just go, for free, practically, free. They're just not going to do it. They've got to recoup for, depending on the lender, whether it's Fannie or Freddie, you got certain rules. Whether it's an investor, like private trust or something like that, they've got shareholders to answer to. They've got fiduciary duties they're worried about breaching. So they are definitely going to want to make sure they can justify letting a property go at X price. So yeah, that's not a great way to approach, I'm going to, take advantage of these people because they're in distress and I can further discount my offer. The homeowners are not the one that make the decision, really. Ultimately, it's all contingent on the lender's approval, and the lender is very sophisticated. So that would be my suggestion on that. Yes.
So do you see parking out? Does that give the buyer the ability to walk if there are certain repairs that the seller cannot meet? Is there something in the G rider that allows them to not take on that responsibility?
So the problem would be is depending on, I mean, if it was working at the time, they actually, started their inspections and everything, you've got seller maintenance requirement in your contract. So it has to be, take a picture of it, at the time you contract, has to be in the same condition. If all of a sudden it goes out, the reality is somebody's got to fix that and somebody's got to pay for that. If and under the contract, yes, the seller has that maintenance requirement. Doing a short sale doesn't mean all of a sudden they don't have that requirement unless you modify the contract, right? So then if you haven't modified the contract and you're stuck with that, you basically are in a position where you're going to basically corner the buyer. Do you want this property or not? And you've waited 3 months to get this short sale approval. Your loan is ready to go. Unfortunately, we've got a $2,000 deal here that's going to blow this thing up. Sometimes people would chip in, meaning realtors and brokers. Sometimes mom or dad of the seller might have to take care of something. That happened a lot, where you had family members chipping in sort of last minute to make things go. So that was a solution for that.
But if
But-
somebody wanted to kick in and you, for whatever reason, were looking for a reason to get out of the contract and they weren't able to meet the cost of a new AC, then the buyer could walk.
Under the seller maintenance, yeah, and it's not modified, yeah, you would have a reason, if the seller hasn't done that. But the contract does also say, they have the ability to escrow, to get it repaired if it's something like that happened just before closing. So again, yeah, I mean, they're contractually obligated to maintain the property in the condition it was. That's why I have my own short sale addendum to deal with things like that. Plus, the other thing is waiting to do inspections late in the game is also not a good idea, which we will hopefully get to here. But yeah, that could be a complete deal blow up type of thing. And then if you're dealing with a homeowner who's distressed, are they really going to hire a lawyer and fight it with the buyer? Probably not. Probably not. Ronnie? Yep. Yep.
Based on her value,
Mm-hmm.
and if I got her by this time, your price.
Whoops.
So, they take my offer,
Right. Right. No, that's great. Ronnie had one where, the short sale lender was saying it's this value. She had a buyer with financing who had an appraisal that said, no, it's actually this much less. And this is the appraisal that lender is willing to, give me a loan on. So those are good negotiation tactics as well. On the other, if the buyer's getting financing and they had their appraisal and it comes out, much lower than this broker price opinion, that is not a true appraisal that the short sale lender is relying on, that's going to give you a lot of leverage with that short sale lender for sure. Yep. So let me move forward. I want to make sure we get through some of this. So your short sale approval contingency here. This is an important document for you guys. There's also a short sale listing for short sale listings. There's a document in Florida Realtors. I didn't include it with my packet, but it's something definitely, you would want to include unless your broker has a specific form. Some brokers in town will have a specific sort of disclosure form that you have to provide to the seller if the seller is doing a short sale. It's a great form to have if your broker doesn't provide you one. It covers, basically that the seller will can't expect funds at closing, that they have to submit documentation timely. It's a good thing to cover yourselves as far as making sure they understand that this is what is the process is moving forward and covers you guys. So if your broker doesn't have a specific form, I would suggest going to the Florida Realtors form and using that with any listing agreement. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but if you go into Form Simplicity and put short sale, it'll come up. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yep. So your short sale addendum, the first thing that it's going to say, of course, is that the contract is contingent upon lender's approval. Of course, the lender is never party to the contract, right? They always remind us, we're not a party, we're not a party. But of course, it's all contingent on their approval. And there's actually a definition of short sale approval. It says that essentially they're going to approve, all the closing costs on the closing statement that was submitted, that they agree to accept less than what is actually owed, and they agree to provide a release and satisfaction in order to record in official records. It further says on it that if the short sale approval does not provide for the deficiency waiver, again, that's the delta between what's actually owed on the mortgage and what the lender receives, that the borrower who signed the promissory note is technically still obligated for. If it does not provide for that waiver of deficiency language, then it's not really a short sale approval. And essentially the seller, homeowner, has to agree to that. They have to agree that, hey, I'll accept this short sale approval. I know that there's potentially this liability out here, but I want to move forward, okay? The contingency also provides that the timeframes. Typically what we would see with you have to get the application within 10 days. You have to submit the application basically, within 5 days. And then there's a period to write in, but if left blank, 90 days and within which to get the short sale approved. It's 90 days because that was typically what we were seeing during the great financial crisis, as they say. But, some of the regulations and with the CFPB changes and Dodd-Frank and things like that, the servicers have had to get better. Meaning if you submit a complete short sale package, they have to respond to you within 30 days now. There's none of this, we didn't hear, we've got so many, or, I can't. They have to acknowledge receipt of the complete package, and then they have to respond to you. So that is one of the improvements, from how it was to how it is now, that there's a little bit more maybe urgency. I don't want to necessarily give them that word, but it seems like it's a better process. They basically, once they receive the short sale package, the complete package, they've got 30 days to respond to it. Okay. To respond, yeah. Meaning their response could be, here's your approval letter. Their response could be a counter. Their response could be, something in between. The short, I've done a couple short sales in the last 2 years, and yeah, everything, it's so much nicer. You submit it, just via email or on some like online platform. Nobody faxes anymore. They acknowledge receipt of it, and then we oftentimes get, some sort of canned email response that, we acknowledge receipt. They have a certain period of time within that 30 days, less than the 30 days, to order the broker price opinion and determine eligibility. So they're going to be looking at that application, that essentially that 710 form from Fannie and Freddie, and they're going to underwrite, your seller. So that's another thing to be thinking at this listing appointment. Is this somebody who just, can't sell it for what they paid for it? And they don't want to bring money to closing, but they've got, $150,000 in some checking account. That's going to be a problem. That's going to be a big problem. Those are the things too. Again, encourage them to talk to an attorney, because you are submitting all of your financials. You are getting financially naked with somebody you owe, some institution you own money to. So like if you show them you have, non-protected accounts, meaning certain retirement accounts are protected, even from judgment creditors. So a lot of times you're not worried about that, but it's the brokerage account you're worried about, or just like a large CD that with 60 grand in it, something like that. Cash being disclosed, what you'll potentially receive from a lender then is a short sale approval with a seller contribution of, $35,000 at closing or something like that. But if they owed 120 and they can get out from under the, out from under the property by, forking over $35,000 instead of 120, plus cut off their liability for all these carrying costs and be done and move on. For a lot of people, that's a win. So it's something to think about. Question.
What if they have no money? There's no money, like zero. How does that work?
So a lot of the times what we would do is, we do initial consultations, very short for a certain period of time. A lot of the times I use a certain short sale addendum that provides that the seller, when we're working with the seller client, seller's got to pick and pay for title and pick us because we're the ones doing all the work. We will charge the seller side a higher closing fee, but we will also get a buyer to sign an addendum agreeing to a higher closing fee. So the buyer is going to participate in that. So typically too, if we need, sometimes what we'll require is maybe some money up front with the process, but a lot of the times what I would do is take payments over time because it does take some time. Even when I would be doing my bankruptcy consumer work, those people really have no money left. And people were still able to pay attorney's fees. You find it. When you're desperate, you find it. Family members would help sometimes. So there are ways. I mean, we don't work for free. But a lot of the times we would basically get paid at closing. But, there are obviously costs to doing these things and like you got to pay for estoppels up front now. You got to pay for all these things. So there is still some money that needs to go into it. So, I mean, that's why even when we would, when I did bankruptcy work, you actually really can't pay like a credit card 90 days prior to filing a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7, because that's a preference payment. So a lot of times people would actually have a little bit more money because they weren't making those minimum payments here and there and there. And so it was good. They could actually like buy food and go to the doctor and things like that. So in my experience, when there's no money, there's still a little bit of something if you're, directing it to a solution. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What if you have a list? All of a sudden,
It becomes a short sale?
so
Yeah. I've seen that too. That one was resolved with a family member making up a difference, about an $8,000 difference. And that was good. That's why these listing appointments, you got to ask these people all these questions and kind of be, figuring out the mystery because people are not upfront with you. And we just had one a little while ago that it was not disclosed as a distress sale. Nothing was disclosed. And there was about an $8,000 shortfall. And it was going to be a situation where the seller was going to be in default and had liability. And it was a problem. So what ended up happening is a family member came in and made up the difference. You're not going to have that on every transaction, unfortunately. That's why if you're thinking it's a distress sale or something's going on, I can't encourage enough that people get the information ahead of time. Get with the attorney, we will bring your homeowners association statement. We're going to look up the taxes. We're going to look up all this stuff because there are hidden costs that people don't account for. And so that's where it can become scary that you didn't account for this being even a short sale. And all of a sudden you're in the deal and we're doing our our draft settlement statements and you're literally a week out of closing. You don't want to be in that situation where somebody has to somehow all of a sudden find large sums of money. The rest of this, the short sale approval contingency. Time periods. So number 5 talks about making the initial deposit and calculating the short sale approval deadline is computed from the effective date. All other time periods under the contract commence upon buyer's receipt of the seller's short sale approval letter. So that goes back to educating buyers, getting them ready for this process, the roller coaster that is a short sale, and purchasing it. I if I'm representing the seller, I usually have a different addendum that's signed that basically says, I want the buyer to have some skin in the game. I want to know what's going on, what ugly, horribles are awful in this property, inspection wise. So I would push to have the buyer do the inspection, not wait. Because what happens is you will get through the process in approving the short sale. They do the inspection. And like Jana said, all of a sudden you have some huge awful repair. You guys have spent the last 35 days getting the short sale approved. Now there's something that needs to be repaired and there's no money. I would rather front load things. Some people don't love that idea. They don't want to put any skin in the game until they know that the lenders approved the deal. Well, they need to understand there's a potential pitfall with that. So I will, I will leave that with you guys to think about a little bit. The other part is backup offers. You guys got to keep in mind that when we're submitting a short sale, the buyer is also approved. The buyer on the contract and the buyer on the closing statement and the buyer on the deed, it all has to match. There is no wholesaling. There is, no flipping into a buyer 3 days before closing. What the lenders are worried about is fraud. And you have to actually approve the buyer that is on the contract, okay? You can take backup offers. A lot of people did. You've got to determine whether or not you're going to be doing that on this short sale approval contingency. The rest of it talks about acknowledgements. That's good. Termination upon a foreclosure sale. Sometimes we would get into a short sale where a foreclosure was occurring parallel and we were late in the short sale process, late in the foreclosure process to begin a short sale rather. And unfortunately, the property would go to foreclosure. What does that do with your contract? This contingency makes it clear that you're done. There is nothing to buy anymore. Buyer gets their deposit back, move on. If you're under contract and you have a parallel foreclosure going on while you're trying to negotiate the short sale, and unfortunately it does get sold at foreclosure, your contract's done. So your short sale contract, we talked about this short sale addendum or short sale contingency, approval versus contract timelines. I would prefer inspections are done front load, but again, that's also a consideration for a buyer, whether or not they want skin in the game, spend $400, $500 on an inspection on a property. They don't even know if it's going to get approved. Okay. Broker's price opinion. We talked about that. Needing to update net closing statements. So part of the application, a part of a complete short sale application is providing that servicer, not just with the 710 form, the short sale application that gives the homeowners information, all their financials. It's getting the payoff of the current payoff of any subordinate liens. It's also submitting this draft closing statement. So they have an idea of what the prorated items are, what all the costs are, because they're going to approve those costs. If you end up in a protracted short sale that takes time for whatever reason, you must be updating. You must be working with your title folks to update that net sheet and submitting an updated one. Because we all know, prorations change daily, but, payoffs can change daily. So it's something that we need to be updating and making sure that if some process is taking longer than expected, you get that updated amount that's owed on the property taxes, for instance, and you update that closing statement, and that has to get to the lender because you must stick to what costs are approved on that short sale approval letter. Short sale affidavit, this is a biggie. This goes back to you don't just swap in a buyer potentially, some other, we got an investor or something like that, or they were just checking out this property. Now, everybody involved in the short sale transaction has to sign this short sale affidavit or what we called arm's length transaction affidavit, okay? This thing has scary language in it. Like, we're relying on your representations. There are civil and criminal penalties for, negligent misrepresentation or intentional misrepresentation. So this is where they're trying to carve out the fraud in that potentially comes up when you're dealing with some of these transactions. You may even see at some point, which we got during the great financial crisis, actual what we call restraint on alienation, actual language they want you to put in the deed that says the buyer purchasing this short sale may not sell this property for 90 days because they were worried people were flipping these and making money off of it in the short term, and essentially like, just quick turnarounds. So the lenders oftentimes are going to have you swear and affirm that there's no other side deals or other deals waiting that are contracted for the property. So these are required to be signed by the buyer, the seller, the listing agent, the buyer's agent or selling agent, and the escrow company. So, question. No, that was part of the great financial crisis forms. Yep, it's still not in the very, very beginning. I would say 08, 09, and 10, maybe not. I think it was probably late 2010, 11. That's when you started seeing it on every transaction. Go ahead. But you're saying if they got, yeah, in the short sale context, they're giving up the deficiency, right? Potentially. Yeah, if you're going to bring the money to closing, it is not a short sale. Then none of this goes on. And that's a whole other conversation too for some of these sellers. Some people may not want to take the hit on their credit, and they may be willing to sell some stock and bring 50 grand to closing. That is a conversation, but that is not a short sale then. They do not, default, they preserve their credit. There is nothing like this going on. But if you're in a situation where somebody's in default, okay, not making their mortgage payments, all right, they get the short sale approved, the lender, is giving up something, even if they are doing a partial cash contribution, but getting a portion of it waived. Yeah, they want to make sure that nobody's making money off of this, and there's no secret deals, that they couldn't have gotten more or they couldn't have been made whole. Because like I said before, some of these these notes are actually owned by essentially, their bonds, their securitized bonds. They've got shareholders that they have to answer to, fiduciary duties. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac is still, in conservatorship. So yeah, the problem is they don't want somebody negotiating this short sale on this property. They get a broker's price opinion for $350. You negotiate them down, you show them all the distress stuff. It's really worth, $300. Okay, fine, we'll approve the $300. And then somebody sells it for $380, a month later. That's a problem. So yeah, they're going to make everybody sign off on these. Ronnie. What do you mean sells it for more, like in a foreclosure? Oh, okay, that I'm confused at the question. The question is, that's assuming the short sale didn't happen, right? Then there wouldn't be a foreclosure. Right. Mm-hmm.
So does any of that
40,000, they got those.
Okay, so the way that the foreclosure would work is you don't get a deficiency judgment if you're paid more than what is owed. There's actually surplus funds. If you end up in a foreclosure, okay, and because your short sale didn't work out, they sell the property at foreclosure, okay, and either it goes back to the lender because they can credit bid up to the amount they're owed, okay. Let's say the foreclosure judgment is $100,000. They credit bid up to $100,000. They get the property back. They would take it as REO and sell it later. But let's say an investor buys it at foreclosure. Let's say the foreclosing lender doesn't want to credit bid up to 100,000. They don't want this property back. There's a hole in the roof. It's awful. They're willing to let it go for 75. So some investor is on the foreclosure auction site and they buy it at foreclosure for $75,000, right? But 100 is still owed. The lender has a year to get a deficiency judgment against that homeowner. They may or may not. Okay. Let's say though, they credit bid their 100 and for some reason, somebody bids $125,000 on that property and buys it at foreclosure. But only 100 was owed on the judgment. You now have surplus funds and the homeowner, as well as subordinate lien holders, get a certain period of time, 60 days, to file a claim essentially and start arguing about who has priority for those funds. Does that answer the question? Okay. All right. All right. Next one. All right, short sale process, short sale approval. We talked about that. You can't substitute a buyer. That's not going to happen. Seller receives $0 at closing. There are occasionally, we would see with some of these short sales, an approved relocation, maybe $1,000, you know, for somebody to move out. More often than not, though, they would get $0. The seller would get $0 at closing. Your short sale letter is very specific about what costs are approved. You guys need to be aware, Fannie Mae guidelines, max compensation for both brokers, 6%. Oftentimes what we would see is if there were a lot of subordinate liens, high, you know, there's $6,000 for subordinate liens available. A lot of times they would try to negotiate your compensation down to like a 5%. So one of the things that, short sale listing rider says in the Florida and Florida Realtors forms in Form Simplicity talks about, you understand it could change depending on what the lender approves, because they even, despite the fact that they are not party to your listing contract and you've got a whole separate agreement with a seller, they're going to put their, you know, pressure down and say, we'll only authorize X being paid. So that's interesting too, with obviously the buyer side and buyer broker compensation. You know, if you've got a buyer broker agreement to pay 3%, lender only approves 2.5%, you got to work out with your buyer on that buyer side, you know, paying the difference potentially, unless you modify your agreement. Go ahead. More often than not, this extra document that is available in Florida Realtors would basically, you know, force a reduction down your throat. So more often than not, I would see listing agents get a reduced commission. You know, there might be some other remedy to that, but more often than not, part of the listing agreement and including that short sale listing addendum or rider to it provides that you basically as a listing agent would have to accept a reduced commission. The problem is you're going to sign a short sale affidavit that says you're not receiving, there's no other outside deals or outside negotiations. So you know, the problem would be is if you have a separate deal with your seller for them to pay you some money that the lender could have received, you're potentially in violation of that short sale affidavit. Okay. Mm-hmm. Agreement. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it comes out of the proceeds like it normally would, you know, from obviously the buyers bringing the money, whether it's their cash or their cash plus financing, and it is on the closing statement that is submitted for initial approval by the short sale lender, you're going to put what everybody contracted for. You know, if it's 3 and it's 3 on both sides, that's what you submit to the lender, but the lender may counter that cost, that approved cost, at maybe a total of 5%. They may say, Cindy, your closing fee of $2,500, no ma'am, $1,500. And I might just have to eat it, is typically the way that would work. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 The idea is that, you know, obviously the buyer would make up the difference, even in just like outside of the short sale realm. Yeah. And so you might see, you know, the 2.5% coming from the seller or the seller's broker on the closing statement. Then you got to disclose the extra 0.5 coming from your buyer to the buyer's broker. And that would be part of what is submitted and approved. You would think that the lender, I mean, if it's out of the buyer's pocket, really, what is their business? It's not their business. Yes, it is, because the buyer could have paid like that much more in an offer. That's why they care. That's why they care. That's why they want to know everything that's going on both sides, because they want to squeeze every bit out of that distressed offer that they can.
Just like you would in a normal.
Yeah, and just being prepared that it may be less than what you think. Yeah, yeah. All right. So foreclosure process. This is our last slide. I think last slide or almost last slide. So just to go through foreclosure. So when you're, you know, basically at least 90 to 120 days late is typically when you would see that scary letter from, you know, certified mail being delivered to a homeowner that says you're in default, we're accelerating the full amount of the loan due, you haven't made these payments, you've missed all these payments, you're not talking to us, we're going to file a foreclosure. That's where somebody knocks on the door, serves you with process, you have 20 days to respond. If you don't respond, they get a default judgment against you, they move to foreclosure judgment, set the auction, set the sale date, boom, boom, boom. That would happen. A lot of times what people would try to respond to is create defenses, things like that. You know, maybe they didn't have the original note, all these things. The case law that came out of the Great Recession has pretty much paved the way for lenders to be able to, you know, efficiently move forward with their foreclosures. And so once that process begins, you are under a time crunch now. You are potentially moving parallel with your short sale negotiation with this foreclosure process. The nice thing though now with some of these guidelines, if you're early enough in the default and you're choosing and you're communicating with the servicer, there are provisions under certain regulations, CFPB regulations, that provide like a timeout, like a, you know, hey, take a breath. We're not going to actively prosecute this while we're reviewing your short sale application. So you have to be early in the process. You can't say like, hey, I've got a foreclosure hearing where they're going to set the judgment and set the sale date tomorrow. I'm applying for the short sale now. Here's my package. You can't go to the judge now. Not going to happen. All right. That's not going to happen. They want borrowers and homeowners in distress being active and pursuing some solution early in the process. So maybe they don't even have to hire the foreclosure attorney and get them started. But the minute that happens, you are definitely under the gun as far as you got a limited window to get this other solution done so that they will stop the foreclosure from happening. It gets sold at a short sale. If there is an active foreclosure going on, this is really more for title in my world. We just make sure they will say in their approval that they'll go ahead and, once the closing has occurred, they're going to dismiss the foreclosure, release the lis pendens. Then there's no foreclosure out there. The home was sold via short sale. But once that process begins and somebody were to get served with process, you can't ignore it. You got to deal with it. If you're in the loss mitigation, you at least have to let the court know. You file a response as such. You may not have any defenses because you're not paying the mortgage, but you certainly want to make the court aware that you're working with the servicer. We've got a contract. You may be able to, contact the foreclosure attorney directly, even to get a little bit more time before they set some sort of hearing or move or prosecute the case further. But you can't wait till literally I have a hearing notice in, 10 days. What do I do, Cindy? Well, not much at that point. The sticking your head in the sand and just hoping everything gets better is probably the worst thing a homeowner can do. That a lot of people just don't want to deal with it, and they lose valuable time. The other thing about it is every day that you're late, 30-day, 60-day, 90, 120-day max line items, killing their credit. Some of these people would go a whole year of this before they even decided, like, maybe I should try to do something with the house or short sale it, or maybe try and get rid of it and work something out. Maybe I'll get $1,000 to move. They've already got a year of all these late line items, and it's 7 years from each of those inquiries until it falls off. So like if you didn't start your process till later in the game, or these people that, waited like 2 years before, they did anything, you've got 7 years from foreclosure plus the first 2 years, 7, 8, 9 years of these bad credit inquiries. And that's why I'm truly an advocate of, like, let's deal with reality. Let's take the emotion out of it. It's a business decision. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is a box you keep your stuff in. And sometimes you have to get that realistic with people. People get very emotional. When I was doing this, during like the beginning of it, because I essentially started the minute I got my bar card, this is all I did. And, in 2009, I had 2 people, different situations, kill themselves because they were losing their home. So it's a serious, serious thing. And it's very emotional for people. But you gotta, and part of what we do and what you guys do, and all of us kind of working in unison, even the tax person, is like, there is another side to this. There are solutions. They're not perfect. You're not going to come out completely unscathed, but you can't completely avoid this, because down the road it's going to be a longer recoupment, and you're not going to get to the other side sooner. There is life after short sale. There's life after foreclosure. People do very well. There's life after bankruptcy. It's not people, there are solutions for a reason. People fall on hard times, and you shouldn't be ashamed for asking for help, because it's important for people to get this stuff. It's important for you guys to know. You never know. You might be door knocking, and all of a sudden you end up in a conversation with somebody who's just like, distressed, who knows what the situation was. They're behind on their mortgage, and here you go. Now you've got some information, to maybe help them, deal with them, or at least get them towards people who can help. I did a lot of this work. This was pretty much primarily my practice for 10 years. This is all we did. I'm hoping that this scenario, we're still like, everybody wants to be here in Florida. Everybody wants to come here. I think that, that's something that works for us. I don't know what the future brings, but obviously I do know we went through quite an appreciation in a short period of time, and there are going to be folks that need to deal with shortfalls on mortgage payoffs and values and things like that. So, hopefully you guys got a little extra education. I'm going to open it up. Go ahead. Yeah.
foreclosure process that says in order to obtain title collateral.
Mhm.
When of all the houses I've always owned, the bank kept the title until the loan was paid off. And I was always told.
Are you from California? Where are you from? Arizona? Okay. Yeah, and mortgage, yeah, in Michigan, it's, I think, isn't it a mortgage or deed of trust? Or what do they call so your mortgage in Florida is a security instrument. They do not hold it in title to the property and trust or anything in Florida. You actually, the homeowner owns the property right up until the certificate of title is issued, not even the foreclosure sale. The foreclosure sale occurs, 10 days thereafter, a certificate of title is issued. That's the vesting document that vests whoever bought the property at foreclosure with title. Up until that point, the homeowner owns the property. They can do with it what they will. They can try to negotiate the short sale. They can redeem the property if they have a windfall and somebody gives them a bunch of money. But they own the property subject to the security instrument, which is a mortgage. That is what the lender is seeking to foreclose. They don't have title to it. Different. Yeah, different in Florida. In Florida, it is a foreclosure process, judicial foreclosure, meaning filing a lawsuit. It's not like order to show cause, like an auction immediately by the sheriff or something like that in different jurisdictions around the United States. No, it is a process. It is a lawsuit with, time to respond, hearings, summary judgments, all the things. And then the auction process, the foreclosing lender gets, their judgment of a certain amount. The foreclosure auction is scheduled. It all takes place online now, not at the courthouse. And you bid, and the lender actually has to disclose whether they're going to fully credit bid on their judgment amount. That's typically what most of them do, and they take the property back. But sometimes what they'll do is what I explained before. They may not disclose that, meaning maybe they're looking for just exiting the property at the foreclosure sale, and they might take less than their judgment, and some investor might get it. So a lot of people look at these foreclosures online for like investment properties and things, deals and whatever. Some people are successful, some not. You definitely want to do some lien searches. But yeah, no, the homeowners own the property. People have title subject to the security interest. So that's what they're foreclosing. The lender can't say, you didn't make this mortgage payment, I automatically own this property. No. Mm-mm. No. Go ahead.
You mentioned that you do a 30-minute free consultation.
Mm-hmm.
That if the buyer or if the seller uses you, that they pick and pay, and you're the title company. What does the other pricing look like? What fees are involved from your end after that?
Yeah, so what we would typically do is we want to, counsel them, see what we're dealing with, how many liens we have to negotiate. We also like to get a little bit of background to see if this person would be really eligible for a short sale, or is it somebody that just can't sell their property for as much as owed and doesn't want to bring cash to closing. That's a big deal. That's going to be a big deal. People have a lot of money in the market right now, and they have brokerage accounts, and those brokerage accounts are very, slush with funds. And so that's something I would want to be making sure we're not in a situation, where we have to or there's equity in the property. I even had somebody talk to me about that. I'm like, no, they're going to make you pay. This second mortgage, this secret second, this thing that hung out forever that somebody stopped paying. And then finally they were selling the property. They had done a modification in 2013, and then they just stopped paying that second mortgage HELOC. Years later, what do we have in 2021? Huge appreciation. Now the guy wants to sell it. Well, the first mortgage was dealt with. The second was $170,000 HELOC. And the guy wanted to get out of it for 70. I was like, you're crazy, man. Look at your offer. You're walking with $500,000 at closing. There's no way they're not going to make you pay. So those are the kind of questions I want to make sure the picture is as people present. And if there's something where I'm going to have to really deal with some nasty liens and lots of negotiation, we're not sure it's going to ever close. That's typically where I'm thinking I need to get a little something up front, cover my time. Are we really going to be successful in negotiating all these things? Or are we going to have to seek to get money from family members or other that's the analysis. And then usually what we want to do is have them enter into any sort of short sale. We want our addendum, which essentially says seller picks and pays for title. We agree to X amount of closing fee. The buyer agrees to X amount of closing fee, and they're hefty. It's usually like a $2,500 deal. So, we've got multiple closing statements to generate, update title, things like that. So yeah, the closing fees are abnormally high compared to your regular residential resale. Absolutely.
So closing fees are what you're talking about, but could there also be an hourly rate where you do outside of that? Or is this what you're talking about, checking out, making sure that
Yeah, no, I mean,
legit situation, that's all part of the fee.
the only time I've had to do anything hourly is if I have to deal with foreclosures, like a lawsuit, and that's a separate engagement, separate fee, separate deal. Then that's typically going to be additional fees. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
1 and then 2. Mhm. That's a great question. I love this question. Usually I get the question after they bought the property. It's very easy. If you're looking at foreclosure properties, they have to be published for 2 consecutive weeks before they're sold at auction. So that is the perfect time for somebody that is looking at the auctions coming up to get title reports. Okay. And it's something you have to pay for. It's something that you'd have to pay an attorney to review. My process, I review the foreclosure. I get with my title underwriter to do an exam. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's a lot better than buying a property, for $50,000 and find out that there's a $550,000 first mortgage that you just bought it subject to. And your $50,000 investment is gone, once the first mortgage decides to foreclose. And I have seen that. Yeah.
So basically, you have to.
Yeah, you have to search the title before it goes to foreclosure to know what is actually happening. Because you might see the foreclosure and let's say it's, such and such bank. Well, such and such bank might be foreclosing their home equity line of credit in second position. And therefore you see some other liens like a tax lien, HOA lien being foreclosed out and think, oh, well, it's, some big bank. It's good. It's the normal foreclosure. Not knowing that there's a first mortgage also that's not going to be included in the foreclosure because you don't foreclose upstream. You only foreclose downstream. So if I have a first mortgage, a second mortgage, a tax lien, and an HOA lien, 1, 2, 3, 4. The second mortgage decides to foreclose, they can only foreclose the tax and the HOA lien, everything downstream below it, priority wise. It can't jump up. Yeah, the HOA, yep, they foreclose and they take it subject to that first mortgage if there's a first mortgage. And that would happen. That would occasionally happen to people. They think they're getting some great deal and then they find out later on that they just lost their investment. Mm-hmm. On a short sale? Normal owner's policy. That's part of what we're doing with this short sale negotiation is making sure that all liens are released. They might not be completely satisfied. There might be a deficiency remedy that's reserved in a short sale approval letter, but they will say in their letter, we agree to release the mortgage lien on such and such a property. So they do that. And, you send the payoff, the short payoff via wire transfer, like you would a normal payoff in a regular residential closing for a seller. And then usually within less than 30 days, you get the release of lien recorded. It's just a matter of, we don't know what happened with the deficiency is also dependent on what's approved. A lot of the times the deficiency remedy would be reserved in these short sale approvals, meaning potentially a seller would have to wait and see if a lender sued them personally for the difference. And occasionally that happened, and people will get sued for the difference that was still owed. That would ultimately a lot of times drive them into definitely bankruptcy, or sometimes they would negotiate a payment. I had a client that got sued on a deficiency. I think it was like 300 something thousand. And we negotiated essentially like a settlement agreement with a payment schedule for, he was basically in like a Chapter 13, but not in a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. We had 5 years to pay a certain amount. They did discount the deficiency further, but he had to pay a huge lump sum up front and then make certain monthly payments and then like a balloon payment. But on like 300,000, I think he ended up paying just a little bit over 50%. So,
These deficiency liens, can they ever come back to bite the buyer, or is it only on the seller?
oh, no, it's only on the seller, because at that point, with your short sale approval, they've agreed to release the security. So all they have left is the promissory note, which is a personal obligation to whomever signed that document. Yeah, yeah.
How often are these deficiency liens acted on? Insofar as the seller, is it?
You know, I think,
definite or-
I think towards the end, there was a lot of litigation. There was a certain mortgage servicer and mortgage insurance company that sold the debt off to a certain organization where there was a lot of litigation over deficiencies. I'm not sure how aggressive they're going to be. I really don't know. I felt like towards the end, tail end, it got a little bit better. But then, you know, there were a lot of people that ended up that would file bankruptcy first and then live in the house while the foreclosure was going on, or wait till after the bankruptcy to sell the house. Then there would be no right to a deficiency because they've discharged that debt in the bankruptcy. They're just, you know, going to sell the house and do the lender a favor. Maybe they were worried about continuing condo assessments that they would be obligated for, or continuing HOA assessments. So they wanted to just be done. So they got rid of it that way after living in it, you know, basically with no mortgage payment at a lower amount for a couple years. Did I get everybody? Did I miss somebody over here? I'm gonna take. What do you mean? Like, oh, some of the costs? Yeah, on the net sheet? Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you're doing it right, there's always some wiggle room somewhere, because the prorations change daily. So yeah, you would project out, I would often project out a closing date after. Yes, be prepared. Yes, these are like negotiating short sales are like a second job. But no, that should be whoever is doing. And that's the other thing. That's why I liked control when I dealt with the sellers. I dealt with a couple times where we had to do closings where there were separate short sale negotiators and they weren't even using our company, and our fees didn't get approved and things, and it gets messy. Like, the other suggestion is, that's why I like, if you're dealing with a seller who's in distress, get them with, attorney that's going to essentially do the closing, help with the negotiation, submit the documents. We're all working in unison, rather than somebody over here secretly doing stuff and then we all have to just, accept it. Because yeah, you have to make sure that they're prorating the taxes correctly, that people have a correct amount of what's owed to the HOA, or if there's any sort of, there might be just some extra fee, like a late fee or something like that nobody accounts for. So, yeah. But I've noticed in later years that short sale approvals, getting them adjusted because of an issue like that, was actually easier to get than years ago. Yeah. I would like to. Sometimes I would project out a different closing date to give us more room with the proration sometimes.
I think
Yeah. Well, you got to understand too. Yeah, I mean, it's not, don't get me wrong, I'm not the only one that did this during the Great, everybody had to. We all have the education. It's just whether somebody's willing to take it on these days. You know, there's a lot of work out there for people with normal transactions. You know, that doing a short sale is a lot of work. It's extra work. And so you got to feel comfortable. Number one, they have the experience, but there's plenty of other attorneys in town that did this. We all had to, you know, at a certain point. This was the only game in town. But, you know, some people would rather just stick to regular transactions. So, you know, and some folks, I mean, some purely title companies, I mean, they're just going to be doing the net sheets. That's all they can do. So, you know, it's who you feel comfortable with, but there's definitely plenty of people that have done it, that do it. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing. There aren't tricks. I mean, I love when people, yeah, there's really no trick to it. It's a process. It's a grueling process that you need to prepare both sides for. It's an imperfect process. And there's no perfect result, but ultimately a buyer should be happy. They're getting a property, you know, probably at some sort of discount compared to something that's not distressed. And then the seller's getting out of a bad situation. So if a buyer's like very uptight about timelines and things and having things a certain way, a short sale is likely not for them. So, all right. I didn't call on you yet. That's a different seminar for another day. All right, I can talk to you afterwards. Any other short sale questions? One more, and then one more.
Is it always the case?
Yes, yeah,
That's always going to show.
yep. Last
My
question.
question is this, all this hurricane damage that we had,
Mm,
a lot of these waterfront condo buildings had massive damage, massive assessments, and a lot of the condo owners are unable to pay assessments. Some of the buildings, they were like 15,000 a
Oh.
month.
easily.
Yeah. For 6
Yeah.
months, 8
Yeah.
months. So clearly the condo owners got blamed. What is the process when the insurance company is not reimbursing the HOA? The HOA has a construction lien on it. How does that all play out with the condo owner's inability to pay these assessments? And, you know, I'm just curious to see how would they go to a short sale? Would they?
That's going to be dependent on what other, I mean, a lot of these folks, a lot of these people, you know, they may have bought these properties free and clear, and they may be on fixed incomes. I mean, they're not, you know, poor, but they're living in retirement. They've got a certain set amount, you know, in their pensions or in their Social Security. You know, gathering $50,000 in a hot sec is not exactly on their plate. You know, that's one of those stories where you got to look at the equity situation. I mean, a lot of people are going to have to exit these condominiums because they're on fixed income. They may not owe anything on it, but the cost of the assessments have gotten so high that they're going to have to potentially exit that. Mhm.
Paid for with the building having massive damage and all these liens?
Probably not, but that again is probably outside the scope of this discussion, but we got wine and cheese afterwards, so we can have a conversation. My last tidbit for the recording is, of course, this is all educational and not legal advice, so don't hold me to anything that I've said here for educational purposes. Thank you guys so much for having me and going down this lovely short sale lane. You guys know how to contact me if you have any questions. I really appreciate your attention today. Thank you so much. I hope you took something from it, and have a good week. Thank you.